Welcome back, everybody. This is Derek Kirby, and this is Cheap Pop. We are back for another episode here, and we are talking Perfect Blue. I am joined by my co-host, Matt Carlin. Matt, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm ready to talk some anime.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, spoiler alert to the people watching this. We actually already recorded a long episode of this. Did not end up using it. So we're hoping to be a little bit more condensed. We had some audio issues and everything. And part of that was me too. I think with how I had it set up as well, I was getting a reverb effect. So yeah, there was just all kinds of issues for why we couldn't use that. So we're hoping that we can make this a little bit more digestible than our last couple episodes have been. But yes, as I said earlier, today we are talking about Satoshi Kon's 1997 classic, Perfect Blue. Now, Matt, we've both watched this several times now, At least 4 times, it seems like each. What are your feelings about it? I know you had a different opinion the first viewing compared to subsequent viewings, but what is your overall feeling towards the film?
Absolutely love it. There's so much to look into here, and it's one of those movies you can go back 150 different times and you can read the movie a different way each time you watch it. I would highly suggest if you're going to watch it for the first time, go with the subtitle version because there's so many visuals that I think you really need to be paying close attention to know where we are, or at least to try to discern like what's happening right now. Are we in real life? Is this a dream? There's just so much to be looking out for that, you know, when you're trying to read subtitles and you're trying to focus on what's happening in the background, it can get a little bit mixed up. When I watched the dub version, it was much easier to start following the story a little better.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you initially misspoke. You said the subtitle to watch the subtitle version.
Oh, sorry, no,
you meant the dub version. Gotcha.
You can watch it if you want.
That's why I was
do it second, third viewing.
Yeah. That's why I was confused because you immediately then were like subtitles get in the way of like paying attention to details. I was like, I thought you said that was better.
Yeah, but just ignore me.
Yeah,
words, you know.
Yeah, words. I mean, I tripped over my intro like 3 different ways, and I just kept moving forward. So. That just comes from doing live streams. Eventually, you're just like, well, can't get that one back. Just got to keep going.
Just keep rolling with it.
The only way you learn. So, yeah, I agree, though. I absolutely loved this film the first time I saw it. And to your point, I saw the dubbed version originally. I actually have not watched the subtitle version, but I watched the dub and I was captivated by this film. It was dark, creepy and disturbing at times, but it's a thriller through and through. And it pushes the envelope in a lot of different ways. Like it is an adaptation of a book. So it's not a completely original story that Satoshi Kon unleashed for his debut film, but it is still a very vexing story in that regard. So much commentary, so many layers, and it really toys with a lot of reality, different concepts of that. And you have really even poignant to this day commentary related to like social avatars. Like if you thought about it in terms of today, you would talk about like social media specifically. But in 1997, the internet, makes a little guest appearance in this film. And I wonder how that read to a 1997 audience, because it had to be very different than how it reads today. But it reads today just like, my God, this guy was a visionary. Like, how did he see this? How did he know?
Way before its time, for sure.
Yeah. It's so the film is about a 21-year-old pop star in Japan. She's part of a, let's say, mildly successful trio called Cham, and she ends up they're not making a lot of money, so she ends up switching to a career in acting. And the special, really, it's not a special, it's a movie. It was initially envisioned as an OVA, and they developed it with that idea in mind. And it ended up being a theatrical release, which is interesting because that pushes a lot of boundaries that you usually wouldn't get away with. And we'll get into those later. But yeah, it opens with her last concert with the band. They're playing middle of the day at some rundown public square. It's not any kind of special thing at all. It's like a kiddie show. It opens with the Power Ranger sequence, which in the subsequent lecture we watched, Satoshi Kon talked about for like 20 straight minutes, just all the thinking and symbolism behind that, whether it was the colors of the outfits or it was the villain's name and the little staged play of the Power Ranger knockoff. Just crazy the depth that went into that. But
in a scene you could so easily overlook as absolutely nothing relating to the story. Yeah. I mean, he put a lot of thought in every single scene he put in this movie, whether he really used it to his, thoughts of the movie's best advantage or not. He put a lot of things in there that made you really like question what's going on.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that he was a successful manga artist prior to directing. And so he understood like the composition, not just the blocking of certain scenes, but the composition of the frame as well. And that really came out in his lecture series as well, as he broke down these different shots and different scenes. But in the show, she's basically announcing that it's her final show with the band. She's going to go be a rookie actress and try to go that route. We kind of get the feeling later that it's not necessarily like her choice. Like, we know she came to Tokyo to be a musician, and she's kind of being directed this way because her agency just wants, like, oh, she's marketable, we want to make money, but the band's not going anywhere, so we want to push her as an actress. She is a good actress from what we see, but it's still one of those things where, because she did the squeaky clean pop star thing for so long, she's going to have to fight against this perception. And that might kind of shape the kind of roles and the way they push her to move away from that image. But even with mid-tier celebrities we see in this film, there is obsessive fan bases to be considered there. There are obsessive fan bases to be considered for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So she does the final show. She goes, and immediately back at home, she's getting like threatening faxes, which I guess that's one of the dated things in this film, a threatening fax or whatever, basically calling her a traitor. And she ends up going like the following day, I think it is, like onto the set to film her one little scene, like one line of dialogue for her debut on this TV show, Double Bind. And a fan letter there, I guess it was for her, explodes in her agent's hands. He's not killed, but he is injured. And so that kind of sets the tone. Like, okay, so we've got like an angry, obsessive fan. Like, there's even like a scrawl of the blown up paper that she can see before it soaks in blood. I think might even be calling her just it's not calling her a traitor. It's saying like, next time it won't be a warning or something like that. Yeah. So
by the magic of envelope bombs, which, if anyone in the comments wants to explain how that's physically possible, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. And the logistics of all that is interesting as well. Like, how did it get mailed without a return address? Like,
why did opening it make it explode? No one knows.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of things like that. Like, her agent is still wanting to push her into a more serious role, give her a bigger role in the show. And you see him kind of whining and dining, so to speak, the writer of the show. And it's kind of like, whoa, what do you want me to do? She's a pop star. And they're like, oh, no, you can push past that. So then his answer to that is, all right, well, let me push as far as I could possibly push on apparently a television show in Japan, which is apparently pretty damn far, because their recommendation, like, okay, you want to have a bigger role in the show? Well, you're going to have to be a damaged and broken soul to do it, because you're going to have to endure a rape scene in a strip club. And we're not even talking about like something starts to happen, it's implied, and we cut away. No, we're going to hold on this scene uncomfortably long. And it's a scene that in his lecture series, Satoshi Kon actually said he went too far. And I mentioned earlier that when they were producing this, when they were working on it, they thought it was going to be an OVA. So they thought there'd be certain limitations. And in an OVA, you have less marketing. And so you kind of have to travel by word of mouth. And so it seems like by that basis, he thought, I have to push the envelope to stand out. Well, then it ended up being a theatrical release instead, which is kind of funny, because even before it was an OVA, was the expectation, they tried to do a live action adaptation of the film. and it fell through in terms of funding. And so they had to go this route. But he said seeing it in the premiere, that scene on the big screen, he had to look away. Like,
he definitely felt bad about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's not a good sign when your creator is like, ooh,
too far.
I drew that. I animated that, and we're counting thrusts. Okay, Jesus. It's a very shocking scene. It is uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable because of how long the scene holds. And like, even though it's clear the whole time, like you see like even like a cut at one point and the actors kind of talking amongst themselves, like as they have to awkwardly sit in position. And it's like the guy who's like straddling over her is like apologizing for how heavy he is or something. And like, while that should kind of like defuse like the uncomfortable sexual assault vibe of it all, it almost makes it weird because like you see kind of how she defers in these cases. Like she's like, oh no, it's fine. You're like, she's no matter what, it's like she's polite and pleasant, even when like it's damaging her, even though she's already like suffering and like being traumatized by what's happening, she's still deferring. And then that's why as the scene carries on, you see the mind break moment. She stares up in the lights, eyes go hazy and everything. And he said in the lecture series, Satoshi Kon, that this was like a death of the pop star former self of her. And
and like when she gets home, you know, she arrives to a tank full of mostly dead fish, which I think, you know, in addition to the dead fish being, you know, a really traumatic thing for her, it was kind of like that moment where she went through that scene was a death of her in a sense. It was the death of her pop star idol career into this new realm of things, which she really wasn't prepared for. It's something she was pushed into by the people that were kind of leading her career in life. And as you see, she really doesn't have a lot to say about anything. I mean, most of her decisions seem to be led by one of her managers. I mean, she's kind of just being drug along by them as far as what she's doing in her life. So this was something she really didn't want to do, but was forced into. And we get to see for the first time, like how this is affecting her emotional state. And then in addition to that, the fish are just kind of like mirroring like, oh, this is just a horrible thing that just happened. And there's no undoing it. Like the damage is done. The harm has been done.
Yeah, as she's breaking down, she even kind of infers, like, of course, or doesn't infer, she outright is like bawling, like, of course I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel like I could say no. They've all worked so hard for me. And this is kind of the thing, too, where you see this, as you said, throughout the film, these people who she trusts them implicitly and she's putting her faith in them, even when it's not earned at times. Like they don't have her best interest at heart. They're just trying to do what, yeah, we want to make you a star, kid. Doesn't matter what happens to your physical or mental health. Like we're going to make money and you'll be a star. What's to be the problem? So
as long as you're popular.
Exactly. Like, so she's being directed towards these things. And even when she's first told about the scene, she shocks everybody in the room by accepting it, like saying like, yeah, I'll do it. Like, it's not like it's going to happen for real. Obviously my parents aren't going to like seeing that, but you know, it's not happening for real. And if I want to be taken seriously as an actress, then I have to be willing to break from that image. And yeah, you see, then she comes home, the dead fish kind of symbolizing further, like one, she's already wearing all black, basically. So she's already in a color of mourning, but then the dead fish further drives that home. It's like the breaking point for her. And from that point on, her mind is just fractured. You start to have these projections of essentially like a virtual Mima in that case. And it stems, the reason it's a virtual Mima is because the film works a lot with this fan blog website called Mima's Room, in which fans post about her and like gawk over her and what the latest news and gossip is. And there are a lot of posts on there about like basically saying it's Mima herself posting. It's not, but there's someone impersonating Mima on there. And over time, these posts start to become like more and more disturbingly like intimate and accurate, like to the point where they have like on-set audio of her practicing her lines before they even say action. So it's,
or they know which foot she uses to step in the tub first with, which was another detail. I was like, I mean, who's watching her at this point? Because there's it's not like that's something she shares with another human being. Now, Rumi might have stumbled across this at one point in time, but there's definitely like a boundary crossed that we really don't see how whoever is writing this, whether it's, another subset of her own mind, or if this is Rumi, like who exactly is doing this. We still don't know. We assume later in the film that it's an individual, but I think there's still some left to be said that it could be her the whole time.
Yeah. So you mentioned the individual here. Even at the first show, we see a rather creepy looking individual, purposefully animated as creepy and unsettling of an individual as you can imagine you would run into. And in the first scene, you have a couple like hooligans like trying to sabotage the show, throwing stuff on the stage, and he tries to defend her honor and he gets his ass kicked. But you kind of see like she keeps seeing him around, and he is an obsessive fan of hers, whether it's the creepy like staring through his one like milky eye at her while she's on stage or whatever. He's always around and he's obsessed with her. And so we see in a thing later on where she's like getting on the elevator and there's like a newspaper clipping taped in there saying that the hooligan was like the lead hooligan or whatever from the show is in intensive care after a mysterious hit and run accident or something. And then she looks and she sees the stalker in this case right there across from her, which if he is stalking her and he does want her approval, she saw the whole thing that took place at the concert. So him taping that on her elevator door up to her apartment, I think that would make sense because he's almost like putting it in front of her face, literally. And then he's
saying, "Here, I'm here to protect you. Yes. I'm protecting your image."
Exactly. Like, look what I did for you. Look what I did for you. And he even kind of smiles when she sees it and then looks at him. And so it's this very unsettling thing. But as her career is moving forward, you see this kind of inner struggle take place. This virtual Mima in this regard is dressed in her former pop star garb. It's kind of this struggle between what she was, what she wanted to be, and what she's becoming instead. And that's why I said, like, we don't know necessarily how serious she was in her desire to be an actress instead, but we are told, at least by Rumi, which make of that what you will, that she did originally come to Tokyo wanting to be a singer and was doing that, but that it was the agency that kind of directed her away from it. So we keep getting all these different glimpses of this virtual Mima as they stack up. And in her personal career, yes, she gets the bigger part. Yes, it starts to like lead to her image changing. And as the show goes forward, it mirrors more and more creepily close with her actual life. But you see that envelope pushed again and again. And then you start to see bodies pile up. What were your thoughts on the first murder and how that all came about?
So, I mean, first of all, the way they did the murders was fantastic. I think every one of them was, whether the scene lasts 5 seconds or 5 minutes, I mean, absolutely amazingly filmed. Now, something I talked with you a little bit about earlier is that, I have two perceptions of how this movie goes. I think Satoshi Kon has a very specific way that he envisions that this movie plays out, but also believes that it's open to interpretation. And I think that he did a lot to make sure that you could kind of make the story how you want. So there's my interpretation and there's what I believe is his, where I believe his is that all these murders do take place. And my interpretation is that this is all in Mima's mind the whole time. So just kind of starting off with that. So I thought the scenes were great, whether I believe that they exist or not. I think that they're either happening or they're all in Mima's head. So what were your thoughts on it?
Well, so the first victim is the head writer of the show who wrote the scene in question. And he's lured in a parking garage. First of all, dude has no sense of danger whatsoever. No instincts.
Not at all.
He backs into a parking spot. It looks to be smeared with blood, basically. I don't remember what it says, but it's basically like a threat. And he's just like, oh, I guess I'm going to ride the elevator up.
Moving on.
Yeah, and he keeps hearing like a jam box playing Cham songs, like her old band's music. And he's just like, well, I don't see anybody, so I'm just going to take the elevator up. He opens the elevator door. There's the jukebox sitting there, or jukebox. Wow, not a jukebox. The stereo sitting there on the floor. That'd be funny if it was a full-size jukebox, actually. But the stereo sitting there on the floor, the boom box, if you will.
That blood red floor.
Yeah. And it's just blaring her music. And then we cut to when the elevator goes up to the next floor, the doors open, and his lifeless body slinks to the floor. His eyes are gouged out. He's been stabbed. We're told like 65% of his body had stabs, but like really other than the eyes, I didn't really notice a whole lot. But the point is he got effed up, and the show is just like, oh, well, guess we just have to continue. Like no murder ever stops anything in this film. They're not like, hey, like she never talks to the police. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, and that's another thing with all being in her mind.
Surrounding her.
They just get glossed over so much that really it doesn't get very much addressed in her real life. And it's like, why are these things not bigger? Why are we not, holding up production or anything like that?
Yeah.
There's nothing that's really tying back to her. So it's like, it's just, I don't know. It's just almost too easy that these just go by with nothing happening.
Like the letter bomb alone, followed by the murder of the lead writer, would stop everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, oh, okay, someone's targeting. But instead, production continues. Her role does get bigger, and she is doing well. But as I said earlier, it's closely mirroring her life. And
double bind.
Yeah, double bind.
It's bound
exactly.
to the movie and bound to her life, which I think is, that's just going to show it's like this. It mirrors it too perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that happens in her real life is almost an exact mirror of what's happening in the show, which leads me to believe even more that this is all in her head, and that everything she's pulling from the movie and creating this dreamscape for herself of what's happening in her life based off of what she's filming, because that's become like a part of her and it's consuming her delusions essentially.
It's an interesting theory for sure. And as things continue, not just the show without missing a beat, and usually you have like a writer die or leave the show, you're going to get a new direction. But this one just kind of keeps trucking along in that same direction, which is another kind of odd thing. And you kind of see as her inner conflict grows, this pull between what she was and what she's becoming, you have the envelope pushed further. Now suddenly she's doing like a full nude spread of a photo shoot with basically a Japanese equivalent of Hustler. I mean, like just completely exposed, completely everything. And you see it on newsstands on all the corners with her just completely spread out and just out there to be seen. And it's at this point she is, I think, at her most, I guess you can't say it's her most broken, but this is like, to me, like the point of no return for her character, where, you have the shot of her in the bathtub, kind of fetal position, screaming under the water. In the Japanese version, she says idiot, which I'm curious who she's referring to, because the English dub, she says bastards. And I thought that was her yelling at her like agents, the people that made her do it, right? Like she's angry at them. Mm-hmm. So then when something happens later, you're like, oh, there's that directed anger. Instead, with idiot, you're like, are you talking to yourself? Are you talking to them? Because idiot doesn't feel like a powerful enough word.
Yeah, there's something with the dubs and the subtitles that don't always match up. That's what I did notice, is there's quite a few lines that were changed, which I feel like the dub version fleshes out the dialogue a little bit more, but there's some things that didn't stay consistent that I think you really have to figure out, like, what did we start with and where are we at now? Because it's like you can have two completely different that, for instance, that's two completely different ways to read that scene.
For sure.
But yeah, it's like that scene very much was, it's like I lost my innocence in a sense with the sexual assault scene, but here I've really lost it. I mean, dignity. I haven't just lost it from a movie perspective. Like now everyone can see, every piece of me, and there's no way I'm coming back from this. It's like that innocence is lost.
Yeah. The first thing was fiction. This is actual reality.
Yeah.
Like the other one was a simulation. Like, oh, it's not happening for real. Well, this does happen for real. And she is very conflicted about that. She's not the only one. Apparently her stalker quotation mark S, close quotation mark, or parentheses, I guess, instead. Multiple stalkers, potentially. He's freaking out about it. You see him emailing someone that's claiming to be Mima, and you kind of infer like this is the person that on the Mima's Room forum is impersonating her, and he's corresponding with this person. And they're basically like, oh, she's not the real Mima. The real Mima would never do this, and you should take her out. You should do something about this. And he's basically just like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So as we push forward, we see that her longtime it's not her manager or her agent. Like there's a difference between manager and agent. I'm trying to remember the main agent's name. Takadoro, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, he's the one that's like making the main decisions, but then she has like a different kind of like manager or handler as well. And that is Rumi, who kind of is like, she's had Mima under her wing for the last 2.5 years since she came to Tokyo and started working with the agency. And she even
kind of more of like a motherly figure.
Yeah, maternal.
Whereas the other
vibes.
one's more business. She's more like about her, like, you know, she's about her image, but she also seems more like a friend to her.
Yeah, and she's aghast as multiple things go down in this film, and she's in disbelief. And after the scene in the club, she outright leaves. Like she still works with the agency, but she's not around Mima. She's gone from the story. And Mima's obsession with this Mima's Room blog just deepens and deepens and deepens as she's having this inner turmoil. And she gets to the point where she can't separate fiction from reality. We get this majorly confusing cut in here. And I know this is a 3-day span you want to elaborate on, so I'll leave this part for you for sure.
Yeah. So what happens is we get done with filming, and there's kind of a transition scene that I believe starts at a bridge. And then we're witnessing an interview that Cham is having, and she envisions this virtual Mima, you know, in this interview with her old group. And she ends up chasing her out of the building. I mean, just absolutely running through everyone, running through crowds. And it ends up where she is in front of a truck. And the truck is driven by the stalker as well. And she's kind of sprawled out. The truck's about to hit, lights are flashing, and then cut to the day. So we're back in her room, and we are watching a news report. Then she's talking to Rumi, who we acknowledge, hey, I haven't seen you in a long time, so on and so forth. Rumi's talking about how illusions don't come to light. And this couldn't be the case. And then we are back on set again. They say something along the lines of, all right, ready to go again, take 2. And we're on the day again, the same news report, the same way she wakes up, and she's talking to Rumi. And she says, hey, Rumi, I haven't seen you for a long time. Kind of a similar dialogue to the day before. And Rumi's like, no, we just saw each other yesterday. Kind of showing that all 3 of these days are leading into one another. To me, meaning that they don't exist. And one of these days is the one where she crushes the cup, and the cup shatters in her hand, and it's all bloody, and Rumi seems concerned. And I think you had some things to say on there as far as...
Yeah, Rumi, when they first are interacting, it's the first time they've interacted in a long time. They acknowledge this, and Rumi is just it's kind of like pleasantries, like it's not real talking. And she's like, oh, you've matured so much since you came to Tokyo, or since you started your new career. Everybody seems to like the new Mima. And then Mima kind of, you know, just how she's responding, Rumi kind of like lets down the act a little bit, and she kind of like looks at her. She can tell she's bothered, like deeply disturbed by something. And then that's when she is saying like, I don't know what's real and what's fake. And Rumi's kind of like, oh, it's not as complicated as that. Like you just need to rest or whatever. She shatters the teacup in her hands. Blood is everywhere. And Rumi's freaked out, trying to like bandage up her hands as Mima's like, is this blood even real? And I think that because of the maternal thing you mentioned, the maternal kind of instinct, that vibe we get from Rumi, I think that influences a reveal from later. But I guess let's wait just a little bit before we go too much into spoilers. So I think that's a vital thing as well with that.
And I will say that's also probably the first time or the only time that we actually see Rumi being somewhat supportive of this new career move, which to me also signifies like, okay, we're in a dream at this point, because Rumi has not been backing this transition. She wants her to be a pop star. She's had to witness her go through the sexual assault scene. She's had to witness her doing the magazine spread. So she sees the detriment of all this. She sees how much this is negatively affecting her image and completely changing essentially the girl that she's brought up and helped get to this place in her career. So the fact that she was supportive there seemed so off for her character, because really, I don't think we see that support much more, because not that she's not supporting her, it's just that she's not supporting these decisions because she doesn't feel like it's good for her. So I thought that was a little off for her character, kind of even more backing the fact that all three of these days that seem to tie into one another seem to all be a dream.
Gotcha. So as we move forward, we then go from there to the most brutal murder of the film, that being of the photographer that took the explicit shoot of Mima. It is kind of like the club scene. It's extended, goes on for a while, and you see multiple stabs with an ice pick. So he's working in his apartment. You have like a projector, like literally projecting the nude spread of Mima on his walls, and he's just kind of like sitting there with a scotch and a cigarette and just kind of like creepily looking at it all. Like it's really like he's kind of getting off on the whole thing. And he gets doorbell rings, like, oh, pizza's here. And the figure has their hat billed down. Their chin is down. The hat is kind of pulled down over their face. And rather than just hand him the pizza, they set it on the ground. And then as he bends down to get it, they pull out an ice pick, stab him through the eye first. And as if that wouldn't already be, I guess, a kill blow, then they follow up with a stab to the gut, a stab to the dick, a stab in the back through a plate glass window, or I guess not plate glass, but a glass window into his office, and then tackles him to the ground. And he tries to grab the phone at one point, and she stabs the back of his hand too. And then she pins him down.
The stabs were great. She was such accuracy with everything.
Yeah,
I mean, it was beautiful.
Very in control.
Yeah. And we get the song. There's essentially like, the Jaws music, like when something bad's about to happen, we get the same music. And it was so beautiful in this scene, because I mean, we're with this killer almost, like, hey, you stole this. Like, we're kind of backing them a little bit, understanding why this kill is happening.
Yeah. So she tackles him to the ground in the living room. The projector's on the wall behind her, and now she's just stabbing. He's essentially dead at this point, certainly within the first couple stabs on the ground. Hat flies off. You see Mima's face, and you get blood spattered Mima's face with the nude shoot plastered on the wall projected behind her. And it's almost like it's just fueling that rage more and more. The news thing the next day tells you he had stabs over 75% of his body. And yeah, I believe that one on this one. Like the first one said 65%. And I was like, I don't know about that. That looks like
she was going to town on this guy.
Yeah, this one was much more intimate, I think. And so then we have the question there, like, because we see Mima's face, right? But we have the confusion because in the morning, as the news breaks, Mima wakes up to a phone call from, I guess, the agency informing her of what happened. She seems to be in disbelief, but she goes over to her closet, goes straight to it. Now, her face doesn't read like she knows what she's about to find, but she does go straight to it. She's looking for something. Yeah, she finds a paper bag with the bloody clothes from the delivery thing, which, again, raise all kind of questions. And she ends up basically just kind of having to fight through a swarm of press outside her apartment, because finally people are kind of realizing, like, hey, all these murders are happening around this former pop star turned actress. What's that about? And yet there's no interrogation. There's no police questioning. We just kind of keep moving on. We see then the final day of filming for the show, at least for that season, I guess. And then we get another interaction. Then with the stalker, who she's been seeing glimpses of, but I think, as you mentioned, I don't remember if it was actually in our recording or if it was before when we were talking offline, but she's been seeing glimpses of him but it's like, is he really there? Because she'll see him.
all
Someone will say
over
something.
the place, and he'll disappear. We won't see him again. So we're, if nothing else, we know that he's not always there. Sometimes he's imagined, maybe sometimes he's not, but for a fact, there are times where he is not there and she's just envisioning it, which in my mind, you know, this could have all been from the first time she ever saw him, you know, his creepy eye, his look, and the way he fought for her. That's really the first time we see her get uncomfortable. And she's thinking like, oh, this guy creeps me out a little bit, which I think builds to that mental delusion in her head, which is one of my thoughts for how the movie went, is that she's created this stalker. Now, he's creepy for sure. He probably is a stalker. He's probably an obsessed fan. But does that mean that he's doing all this, or is she imagining him doing all this and it's all in her head? So I think that's one of the key points. And really, before we see him in this last scene, she runs into the main girl that's in double bind, the older woman. And she tells her essentially, it's time to wake up now. And we were in the middle, I believe, at some point where she was going to have to film a murder scene, which is mirroring a kill. And we get to this at some point. The older woman says, she's not super old, but she's older than her, says it's time to wake up now. And then that's when we get this next scene, which I'll let you discuss a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, if he is a projection, even if like he's a real person, but what we're seeing is a projection of him, that really speaks volumes to how broken her mind is, that she apparently throws her own self around on that, because after they finish filming the final day, she's slow leaving the set. Rumi's waiting for her outside. You have the main agent, Mr. Takadaro, I think it is, basically talking with Rumi, and he's like, oh, hey, I already lined up a new gig for her. It's a bit smutty, but you know. And you kind of get a blank look from Rumi, just kind of like in disbelief of what he just kind of acknowledged, given everything she knows that Mima has gone through, and more, but we'll get into.
And I felt like that was even a scene for Rumi where, you know, this face I saw her make was almost like, I'm broken now. Like, you've broken me. I am fully gone from what, you know, I was so protective, and you've destroyed this thing that I've created.
Yeah.
And then we get back to Mima with the
stalker in the hall. Yeah. Mr. Mamania is his username on the Mima's room forum. Let's just call it message board, whatever. And he appears in the hallway. She almost seems like she doesn't even know for herself for a moment if he's real, because she like looks back to like kind of call for help, but not like desperate, to the veteran actress you mentioned. And then when she turns back, he's right in her face, and he grabs her, he drags her back to the set, and he's basically throwing her around. He's tearing her clothes off, and he's pretty much going to, like, he's making it clear he's going to kill her. But first, he's going to try and essentially recreate that rape scene. And yeah, that's a point where we know that he was told in the email correspondence to take out this imposter Mima. But the sense of kind of, I think his fanaticism also understands, like, he saw the scene. He didn't like that the scene happened, but there's also a part of him that has that kind of like perverse desire to reenact it himself, essentially, at this point. And so he tries to do that. He rips off her shirt. He basically tries to tie her legs together with a belt, and he, like, in the scrum, before he can actually do anything, she's able to grab a hammer, strike him in the temple, and he does this dramatic twist and twirl and fall, where it looks like he's dead. His eyes are open. He's not moving, not making any sound. And then it's been a while at this point with Rumi waiting outside for her. So Rumi goes looking for her, finds her all beat up in the hallway. She tries to explain what happened, but when they go to the set where she left him, he's gone.
Well, let me interject here for just a minute. After she hits him with the hammer, we are, if I recall correctly, we're back on set for a minute. And that's when she finishes the kill. So she kills, we assume she kills Mamania. in what she believes is real life. And the second that kill happens, we are back on set. She has killed someone on set, for the movie.
For the show, yeah.
And then we're back where Rumi sees her walking down the hall.
Yeah, and there's the applause moment with the lights and everything, and she's not like basking in it or anything like that. Like,
it's so odd that it lined up so perfectly. Yeah. It's like, to me, that was her mental break during. It's almost like a Fight Club type situation, as I was talking earlier. It's like there's two different versions. So although she's on set filming, in her mind, something else is happening. And that's, what I'm thinking is that this is happening at the same time. So although she's envisioning that this, horrible thing is happening with her stalker, that really she's on set the whole time. And this is kind of a mental break that she's having during filming, losing a grasp of her reality.
Interesting. Yeah, that is a good call out for sure. So Rumi finds her, and she basically is like, all right, well, let's take you back to Mima's room, which is a really weird phrasing. And I don't know if that's just a dub thing, because it's like, why would you tell Mima, hey, let's go back to Mima's room? You would say, let's go back to your room. Let's go to your apartment. Let's go to your place. And we go there, we cut to it. And I don't know if just from her exhaustion or if she's drugged or what, Mima just kind of wakes up in what looks to be her apartment. But then she hears a train that she's not used to hearing. She looks out the window, and it's a different apartment building altogether, but the inside is identical to her apartment. The first thing she noticed was that all of the fish were alive.
And the poster.
Yeah, and the sham poster was on the wall. Yep.
Weren't consistent with her actual room.
At that point,
the train is the final realization of like, okay, now I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. Where am I?
Mm-hmm. So then we get the dramatic reveal. The Mima's room poster this whole time has apparently been Rumi. She enters the room. She is dressed in a red pop star kind of attire, but she looks like virtual Mima. But the mirror reflection behind, you see it's older, more overweight Rumi, and she is just completely mentally snapped. She believes she is Mima, that she is the real Mima at this point. And she's trying to sing, but it's god awful. Like it's just complete delusion. It's not even like I could have been a pop star. Like it's not even that. It sets up an intense chase. She then sets out to try and complete what Mr. Mimania failed to do. But before that even happens, you get kind of a reveal. Like it's almost the reveal within the reveal. You then cut from finding out that Rumi is basically more or less possessed by this virtual Mima, to seeing the dead bodies of Mr. Takadaro and Mr. Mimania. And you could say like, oh, well, Mr. Mimania got hit in the head, right? Would that be his death? But he's got blood trailing from one eye, which makes me think that, and as we talked about earlier, the maternal thing, I think because Rumi told him to kill Mima, I think that's as far as she was taking it. But because he tried to rape her, and obviously she saw that, and it's like the recreation of their shared trauma. If you remember, Rumi broke down in tears and ran off the set when they were filming the strip club scene. Because it's like reliving that, and he went against instruction, I think she takes him out too.
Oh, so, absolutely. Yeah. When I went back and watched it, I realized that her hammer blow did not kill him. But yeah, and the thing that we discussed with the eyes, it's like everyone that has caused her this emotional pain and seen her in this like vulnerable state, especially, with whether it be the sexual assaults or the, magazine spread of her nude, there's a lot to do with the eyes in this film. I mean, the first person we see gets stabbed in the eyes. The second person gets stabbed in the eye. I mean, every single kill that Rumi or the projection has caused has been to the eyes. That's like, I don't want you to have seen her in this light. I'm like protecting her and taking that sight away from you.
Yeah, it's the perception, right? It's attacking the thing that perceives. So in this, the kind of commentary with that, I really think is the most revolutionary of what Satoshi Kon really talked about, is kind of this social avatar and this ownership, this kind of obsession that develops. Like, are we our true selves, or like, as he kind of very ahead of his time discussed, like online, are we really ourselves, or are we these kind of amalgamations that we create, these avatars that we create? And at what point do you even maintain ownership of that avatar? Because whether it's with film releases today or whatever, you see people get bent out of shape. Like if they remake a movie from the 80s and it sucks, really, regardless, like people are going to be pissed about it because they feel it as if it's being ripped away from them. Even though the original still exists, they feel a sense of ownership over this idea, this concept, and its place in the world as it relates to them. And that kind of plays out here. Like her fans, her obsessive fans, whether it was Mimania or whether it's Rumi, they can't accept what decisions she's made. It's like she's changed her career trajectory, and it doesn't line up with the perfect image in their mind of who she is and what she should be. And so rather than just be angry or disagree with it, they take it to a level deeper, like this point of obsession where eventually Rumi basically just kind of has a thing of like, oh, it's almost like I've raised her and directed her. And now she's done this. Well, no, I'm going to say she didn't do that. I'm going to do it right as if I'm doing it for her. And she basically has this delusion that she is at that point Mima. And we talked before about this idea of the virtual Mima, like that it is a physical, tangible thing. We know that we see her at times in the film, whether it's cropping up in a car in the tunnel going the opposite direction in the back seat, whether it's the chase in the radio station, or her hopping across the street lamps, whatever. She's a real tangible thing, and the fact that she can influence, almost like a spirit could possess a person.
Yeah,
and
possession
there's
of some sort.
Yes, and there's been
we were talking about too, struggle. Shared memories, like with the first kill or the second kill, I guess, where she goes into the closet, finds the clothes. It's like, if Rumi did that kill, we have to assume that this possession is possessing both of them, and it's giving them both these memories of like what's happening in their lives, because she knows there's clothes in there, would be my assumption, because she goes straight for it. So whether she killed or not, I mean, Rumi definitely set her up to believe that, and that, that possession, the illusion of the virtual Mima, gave that thought to her in her head to like, oh, this was you. This was you that did this.
Yeah, there's definitely, we talked earlier, whether it's the symbolism of the two fish kind of representing the struggle within herself, the struggle between her past self and what she's becoming, and her struggling to kind of reconcile those things. Like one version of her is going to win out in the end. Like the virtual Mima is constantly saying like, I'm going to take back control. I'm going to go back and do this. I'm going to eventually like do away with you, whatever. There's all kinds of comments like that. And I think in that regard, she's kind of trying to prey on Mima at a point of weakness. And even though Mima goes through incredible trauma, and that's why in kind of one of those various theories that are out there where Mima is the one actually committing these murders herself, and other things are projections or delusions, whatever, whether it's Mamania or stuff that Rumi would be doing, whichever the case, it definitely kind of opens a lot of doors where you're like, all right, well, there are shared experiences like you referenced. So there's something there. And Rumi, the fact that she would have always had this delusion, I don't think would be the case. Maybe you say that kind of like the moment that broke Mima on set broke her, and she just eventually kind of gave into the idea. But it's weird that it's the same idea at the same sort of murderous level.
I would say they're definitely sharing in their level of breakdown. Like this virtual Mima has broken them both mentally down to where they're almost mimicking each other. I mean, even going back to, Double Bind, it's like there's this connection between the two of them. And I really think when Rumi finally acknowledges, like, she's fully broken, I think Mima at the same point is fully broken. I mean, she can't even differentiate Rumi from the virtual Mima. Now, I believe virtual Mima is 100% driving Rumi's actions, or at least, in my version, that this is all in her head. But virtual Mima is controlling either the real Rumi or the idea of Rumi to her. And at this point, they're fully both have had a psychological break. And that's really where this chase ensues.
Yeah. So Rumi, as virtual Mima, or however you want to order that, tries to kill Mima. You get a drastic chase, first escaping the apartment and then rushing out into the street across a walkway and everything. And it results in, she does stab her multiple times. She gets her around the collarbone and then in the right side, kind of around the kidney area. And eventually, the reason Mima is able to overcome this is because as they're struggling next to a broken display case from like a shop, they're struggling by that. Mima managed to knock off the Mima wig off of Rumi, who freaks out because it's like it's shattering the illusion for herself of her being Mima. So she freaks out, tries to bend over quickly and grab it, doesn't pay attention, impales herself on a large shard, and is bleeding everywhere, proceeds to basically stumble out into traffic. That's when she gets the iconic shot where she looks back at Mima and does kind of the bloody handprint down her face. And then she notices the oncoming truck, which kind of relates back to the dream.
And at this point, she's virtual Mima again.
Yes.
You know, she's back to the persona of what Mima used to be.
Yes, the wig's on and all that. And in the headlights of the truck, she stands and embraces it, arms out, as if it's a roaring crowd approving of her in that moment. But rather than let her get hit, Mima tackles her out of the way. And we flash forward then several years. We don't know how many years, but it's clearly an older Mima at this institution. It's a psychiatric institution that Rumi is checked into. You see Mima's observing her behind a glass window. Rumi's walking around with like a bouquet of flowers that I'm guessing Mima maybe brought. I don't know.
Yeah.
But in the conversation with the doctor essentially says, yeah, the Rumi persona still comes out sometimes, but a lot of the time she still thinks that she's Mima. And Mima's response to this is basically like, that's all right. I know I'll never see her. And she emphasizes that word. I'll never see her again, which is an interesting thing, but I think it's double meaning, right? Because it's working towards the pop star persona and it's working towards Rumi. And she kind of elaborates then with like, you know, who I am today, I am because of her, which again could have double meaning towards either of those personas. And then as she's leaving, a couple nurses see her and they kind of like gossip amongst themselves, like, is that Mima? You know, like whatever. And one of them's like, what? No, why would she be here? And the first nurse is like, oh yeah, maybe it is just a lookalike. Mima gets in the car, looks in the rear view mirror, smiles brightly at her reflection, and much like her pop star face, and says, nope, I'm the real thing. In the Japanese original version, she just says, nope, I'm real. But that's another one of those things where maybe the translation kind of gives a slightly different interpretation.
Yep.
But this was interesting. So this has been hotly debated, like whether or not one, looking at the reflection for confirmation, and the reflection kind of having the pop star look, like, oh, is that acknowledgement that like she is the pop star persona again? Did the pop star persona like transfer back to her after she tackled, like, because that's what I wanted to think at one point, like, oh, she wasn't saving Rumi. She was saving literally herself, who she saw herself as. She decided she couldn't part with that version of her. And then we're now showing in present day, granted years later, that is still there in her, but apparently not. Perfect Blue, the title, is referring to as well the weather that day, what the sky looks like, a perfect blue sky. We don't see that any other time after the club scene. Everything is a rainy day or overcast or downright just storming. Like, we don't get a perfect blue day, which is symbolic of kind of peacefulness, happiness. And so Satoshi Kon's interpretation was apparently, and as he said in the thing, just because he interprets it this way doesn't mean that it's definitive or it's the correct way. Because I know your theory differs.
Oh, I'd love to go into this a little more once you're done, because I have a very strong theory on the end.
For sure. So his interpretation is that she has come through the struggle and that Rumi is effectively her contrast. Rumi went through the same kind of trauma, the same kind of crisis of identity, but she did not come out the other side. She ultimately stayed trapped within the prison of, this kind of self, this denial. Whereas Mima got through it at the end. And at the end, she's essentially saying, like, no, I'm me again. And if you think about like how the events of the film have played out, assuming it all is based in reality, then all of the people who made the questionable career decisions and directed her, misguided her and all of that, they're all out of the way. It's kind of like she's free to be herself. We don't know if she's still an actress or if she is a musician again. We don't know what her career has transpired as in this time, but we're kind of given a sense that like she got through to the other side and she's in a better place now. And that's Satoshi Kon's own interpretation of it, but it does differ. So I'll let you get into your theory now.
Yeah. So let's see. So when we get to the final scene, so when she's at the mental institution talking with the doctor, and this is the key point that you really have to pay attention to, is the part that you mentioned where she says, or the doctor says, she still comes back to her Rumi personality, every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And the direct follow-up to that statement is, something along the lines of, well, I know I'll never see her again.
Mm-hmm.
So just like you said, when she is in front of the truck, arms spread wide, reminiscent of the dream she had earlier, that is the final moment after this, almost the end of this psychological break. And this is the last time she has to come back to this personality, because after this, it's dead.
Yeah.
And she saves that personality. To me, finalizing her full psychological break back into virtual Mima, or to virtual Mima for the first time. And when she says, we'll never see Rumi again, this is again back to the parallel between the two, is they both were broken down the same way. It started where it was a little bit here and a little bit here, and then eventually there's nothing left. And she knows that there's nothing left of Rumi because she's synced to Rumi, just like the show is synced to her life. Whereas Rumi has fully lost it. She has adopted the Mima personality. That is her life. There is nothing left of Rumi. I mean, whether the doctor sees it or not, it's really not there. And I think that just means even more that Mima is not there anymore. Virtual Mima has fully taken over. The psychological break has happened. And there are blue skies again, maybe, but because she's embraced the mental breakdown.
Just that the conflict is gone. There's only one version now.
Yeah, there's no two left. It's just virtual Mima. She's one, which is why you get the parallel to the I'm real, which is what virtual Mima says all the time, because she's taken over Mima. There is no Mima left. It's only virtual Mima controlling both her and Rumi.
I think there's definitely truth in multiple different interpretations. Like what you're saying, I've definitely thought that at times watching it as well. And I was furiously texting you at different times, rewatching it, like for all the points I thought supported that. I think Kon is right in his statement that like, just because he interprets it one way doesn't mean that that's the definitive, because he does, for someone who seems like he apparently had a very finely clear-cut drawn line for what conclusion you were supposed to draw from his film, he leaves a lot of stuff very open to interpretation. I think good art in general tends to do that. But in this particular case, I think he's going with maybe the interpretation that he wants, as opposed to what is definitively, unquestionably the case. You know what I mean? Like you can look at a bunch of different scenes and say like, oh, well, she's wearing this color in this scene because of this, this shot is shot from this angle because of this. Like he's got that experience. He knows that. But when you get into like the different psychological elements of it and the fracturing of reality, the different glimpses that she has, whether it's the multi-day mashup and what's a dream, what's the show, what's real, and what's real within the show versus a dream within the show. When you get into all these different layers, none of that's ever like definitively ironed out. It's all very much open to interpretation and piecing together. And it's like, depending on how you arrange those blocks and what you choose to keep and what you choose to set aside, you can come to multiple different interpretations. So I tend to lean on what the creator in this case says. That's not to say that like I don't see the value or the accuracy in other things. So I've been on that side, like with what you were talking about as well. I just think that in this case, there's going to be more subconscious decisions on his part. If that's actually the perception he had while making it, there probably are other elements in there that kind of point to and influence that, whether or not we can clearly identify them. Like if he can talk for 20 effing minutes about the first frame of the film with like this Power Ranger knockoff thing and why he chose the colors and what this villain's name is and what that's and what it translates to. It's like, oh, it's a bug thing. And a lot of this film's conflict takes place on the web. Like, okay, there's a lot of layers there for what is a throwaway of all throwaways.
It's almost to me like, he's like, oh, I believe in the clear-cut ending that, anybody could have pieced together, almost as if to challenge you to say, hey, really, you want to go with me? Because I'm going to give you the most clear-cut ending you can get. Anybody that watched this could have pieced that together with the information they have. Why did I build something so complex if it was that simple? I don't know. Maybe to challenge you to say, hey, that's not right. That's not the way the story really went. I mean, why are you just, it's like, I'm the director, I built this. Why are you just immediately taking what I say and running with it? Like, make your own story out of it.
But then he even kind of says in the lecture series, like the thing with great art is if you overanalyze it to death, if you look at it from all these different angles and you have to have every little thing explained and not open to interpretation, then it ceases to be art at that point.
Yep.
I think he's kind of even saying there, like, people can pick it apart to death, but at the end of the day, they're removing what makes it special. And I actually think in this case, that is true. If we laid out everything, if we found like, think about this. How many times since we watched this film originally have we talked about it? How many, not just filming these, but talking about it. How many times have we rewatched it?
Yeah, I think I've watched it like 4 or 5 times now, at least.
And if we figured it out, if we ironed out everything, definitively, no questions asked, every single thing, understood every decision behind framing, blocking, composition, all of that for the film, there would be no mystery and we would move on.
Yep.
So what makes it great in this case, and I think that's what he's kind of trying to say, is like, I understand the nature to do it, but you have to understand if you insist on digging at it, maybe you eventually do figure it out, but you remove what makes it special from it. It goes from being this thing that you reflect on from time to time and think about or rewatch it because you enjoy trying to figure it out. And it becomes just like well, that's done, move on. Case in point. And I don't think we have it 100% right. And even in our videos series we did on it, but The Thing, I mean, that was a film I watched like 10 times to do that multi-part series. I haven't watched.
Even changed since you did those videos. I mean, now I'm off of the dog thing.
Yep. So am I. But my point is, like, I haven't rewatched it since then, and we haven't really talked about it a whole lot. Like, we've a little bit here and there, but like, we picked that over so much that even though we weren't completely right, it kind of lost the allure eventually. And I think that's kind of what he's saying there. So perfect.
See, to me, I don't know if I necessarily even agree with that. It's like, I love going, it's like, how many times have I watched The Thing? I don't know, 6 times a year sometimes. I love that movie. And every time I watch it, I keep thinking of like, what is happening in these scenes where I don't really know? And that's the thing I love about Perfect Blue too, is because I keep watching it and I must have watched it 4 different times with 4 completely different interpretations of how the story went. So, I definitely feel like he said picking it apart does it more harm than good, but it's like, I love picking it apart because then I get to think to myself, like, what are the options here? And how many different ways can I make this story with something that they so beautifully crafted where I can't figure it out? Now, I think if you have a clear cut, it definitely, like, for instance, Inception, which was inspired by one of his works, I think that there's a clear cut to that ending. And I think anyone that knows what it is says, okay, well, that's the clear ending. I like that they left it open for interpretation. I almost wish I didn't find that thing to prove how it ended. I don't want to know for sure. I want there to be that little glimpse of doubt, which is exactly what he does.
So you more disagreed with the statement that it loses the allure, but not that picking at it and figuring it out removes some of the mystique.
Yeah, I think that it just builds to it even more. I think that especially with his work, that he made it complex enough where there is no clear-cut answer.
Yeah.
And no matter how many times we watch this movie, we are never going to 100% think that we've got it. And I think he wasn't confident enough in his own work to understand the masterpiece that he built at the time, and that he thought maybe there's somebody in there going to figure it out, and that if you analyze it enough that there will be a clear-cut conclusion. But I can tell you, after watching it as many times as I have and will continue watching it, I don't think I'm ever going to get an answer, and I love that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Perfect Blue, it's an incredible watch. Definitely a must-see anime film if you haven't already seen it, if you haven't heard of it. It inspired other films as well, whether that's Black Swan or another one of his works, also from Aaron Aronofsky, was Requiem for a Dream, which basically bought the screen rights for the American film, just so he could use the bathtub scene screaming underwater. And then later also made Black Swan, which was kind of an adaptation of that, or as Satoshi Kon kind of said himself, kind of a ripoff. So interesting to see how he feels about adaptation.
He didn't look too happy.
Yeah, he seems to think that's a joke of a word, like a concept, like, adaptation. Or, it's like, or no, that wasn't it. It was homage. He was like, homage. You're paying homage,
it's an homage
to me. Uh-huh. Yeah. Like, I'll remember that next time I want to rip something off. Like, okay, off the top rope with the elbow. But so I give this an A+, absolutely. Like 100%. We talked about, beautiful animation and the way it lays out the fact that it is thought-provoking. It's just mature and disturbing enough to like, I think, make it more engaging because of that factor. It doesn't feel as vanilla. It feels very cerebral at times. And it's commentary, like we talked about just a couple of them, but I mean, if you could peel this apart 10 different ways and find like really thoughtful commentary on a lot of different issues. So check it out if you haven't already. I think we've certainly exceeded the 20 minutes we were talking about, but we'll get it down eventually. We'll keep hammering this out, but
we'll try.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually.
Podcast territory.
Yeah, for sure. Which we do have a podcast. So if you haven't already checked that out, that should be now on Spotify, Apple, all that. Check it out. If you haven't already, leave a like, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Cheap Pop. Till next time, guys, I'm Darreck. That's Matt. Peace.
Thanks, guys. Peace out.